Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Kathy Holmes, and I am with the Division of Policy and Program Development. Welcome to our Care Manager, Provider, and Information session. You usually hear Amanda on these calls, and Amanda moved last week, so she's off and getting situated. So here I am. So again, welcome. Today's topic is the service authorization and the life plan. Just a couple of updates. Thank you, Sally. A couple of updates on the posted sessions. So the session 7, we've had a lot of sessions, haven't we? From May 22nd is posted on the website, as well as the information with the quarterly Care Managers Conference from June 5th. Today's session, as always, will be posted within a pretty quick period of time. Juan, correct?
Yes.
Great. So you see on this slide, Session 9 TBA. Yes, that is true. We will be in touch through the advisory and through other ways we communicate with you to let you know our next topic, which we are working on. So, as I introduced Sally Berry, who is the Director of Service Access with the Division of Service Delivery in the regional office. I'm going to just remind you of how we're going to handle the Q&A portion of the webinar, which is similar to what we've done previously. So there are typically quite a few questions associated with the content. And often, as you listen to the webinar, your question may be answered. So in other words, obviously, you may have a question early on or something that has just been, a burning question for you in anticipation of this webinar. Obviously, you can, if you so choose, use the Q&A to enter the questions, but we won't be answering the Q&A questions until the end of the session, and we'll do the best we can as time allows. So that's good advice. And again, when the webinar gets posted, you can always take a look at that, and maybe there'll be some things that you didn't catch. So I'm going to introduce Sally. Welcome. Thank you for doing this webinar, and it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Kathy, and welcome, everyone. We're going to, as Kathy announced, review the service authorization process and the life plan today, and provide some information and some details that might be fresh or new to people. Mostly, I think it's information people have some familiarity with, and there is some information toward the end of the presentation that is a review of some of our special populations processes that we did a webinar previously on, so we'll kind of go more quickly over that portion. But we're going to talk about the service authorization process for individuals who are new to waiver services, and these are could include people who are brand new to OPWDD, or they could include people who have received services from us but not received waiver services. So there's a whole request for service authorization process that's associated with that. And then we're also going to be talking about existing individuals, meaning folks who are already receiving services, and what the service amendment process steps are involved with. And specifically, we're going to be talking about how the life plans and these service authorization processes intersect. And as I mentioned, we're going to be doing the special populations. So when someone's new to waiver services, I think everyone on the call is familiar with the request for service authorization form, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And also the process to use that, obviously it's submitted to the front door by the CCO staff after an individual has been determined eligible, the LCED has been finalized, Medicaid, the waiver application, you're well into the process, and then at the point in which the plan has begun to be made for services, the request for service authorization is submitted, and typically or hopefully with an in-progress life plan. The front door staff will review that request for services and will, of course, have already had some contact with the individual and family, either personally or through phone conversations. We'll be doing the DDP-2 if that needs either created or updated, or the CAS, where that's available, will be reviewed by the front door. And that, of course, provides information, a little bit more in-depth information about the individual. We'll also, through conversations with the individual and the family, get some sense of what the person's situation is, a little bit about their needs and wants. We'll have available at the front door the supporting documents that were provided as part of the either eligibility or the LCED, or the waiver application, the psychosocial, medical, and psychological. And we'll talk more about this, have information from the life plan. The idea being that all this information that's available to the front door and available through these different tools and different documents and the life plan all aligns and supports and justifies the request for service authorization. The RSA itself, the request for service authorization itself, will identify the specific waiver services that the care manager is requesting on behalf of the individual and the service units. Then the RSA has a segment on the form that allows for the care manager to put in a very short explanation of the need for each service that's being requested. It's not a lot of space, but it is enough space to provide a phrase or two, or to refer to specific information in other documents, either in the life plan or the other documents that I previously mentioned that might have supporting information about the request for services and justify or describe the need. All the documents that we were just talking about, as a reminder, have to be uploaded into choices, and the documentation submission form needs to be used when those documents are uploaded, and an email alert is sent to the DDRO district-specific CCO alert mailbox, informing the district that there are documents awaiting review. I just want to reinforce that those email alert mailboxes are only used for alerts and for the transmittal form, and can also be used for service authorization request forms, which we'll talk to later. But the alert mailboxes are not to be used for uploading documents, other than those forms that I mentioned. And just a side note on choices access, we recognize that there's been a lot of challenges in the accessing choices for some CCOs, although hopefully those challenges are diminishing. But if you personally as a CCO staff person don't yet have access to choices, what we'd like you to do is to work with a supervisor and develop a process with another staff member, for example, who does have access, so that you can submit the information in the way that we need it. I want to talk a little bit about life plans. We've had not a lot of life plans accompanying service requests to the front door yet. Across the state, we think about maybe 35% of the requests for service authorizations that we've received have been accompanied by a life plan, and the rest have not. Now, in some districts, that percentage is a little bit higher, but the highest anywhere in the state, I think, is a 60% life plan rate, if you will. And we really want to make that better, because the plan from the beginning was to have elements of the life plan, not a finalized life plan, because you can't, as you well know, can't finalize the life plan until the services are authorized, but an in-process or a draft life plan, whatever you want to call it. And certain segments of the life plan are what the front door is going to be looking at to understand the requests for services and the reasons for it, and have the justification for going ahead and authorizing those services. Section 1, which is the assessment narrative summary, is our primary focus. This is a section that is to some degree auto-populated by information that comes out of the IAM assessment, but it's also a section that can be edited. So the IAM can populate some of the information, but the staff can go back and add or edit some of that information with an eye toward describing and supporting the needs for the services that are being requested. And it should be kind of a snapshot of the individual's life, talking about what the existing supports are and what the desired outcomes are for the individual to have a meaningful and productive life. And again, should have details that will support the service request, information about the current situation, what assistance is needed and why. And this information is used by the front door staff that initially receives the request for service authorization, and then later on in the process there's a review by the quality review team before the services are finally authorized. So there's another second look at what the needs are, what the justification for those needs are, and how well supported is that in the documents that we have to work with. In that section of the life plan, section 1, there's segments. For example, my home. And the next couple of slides, what we've tried to present to you is just some suggestions about what you might be thinking about including in these segments that will help the front door staff and the regional office teams to better understand and support the service authorization request. For example, is the person living, where is the home? Is the person living in the rural area, or is it more centrally located? What's the family makeup? What are the dynamics? Is it a single-parent household? Are both parents working? What's the status of the siblings? Are there other siblings that might have developmental or intellectual or health limitations? So giving a picture and a flavor of what the individual's life setting is. Likes and dislikes could be included here about the home, and is there special equipment needed? Are there other natural supports around that could be useful to the individual? There's a segment also in section 1 called My Work. So if the person's seeking employment, what are their interests? What do they want to do? Why? Maybe some information about a work schedule that would be very helpful in making some assessment for authorizations. If they already work, what do they do? Where? What supports do they have? Do they want to change? History and experience. Have they had experiences at school? What's their work history? Have they used Access VR? And then there's a segment on health as well, which would be a very helpful place for folks to list the physical and any mental health diagnoses and how these health issues impact the individual's day. Are they restricting or limiting the person in any way from doing things? My relationships, again, the supports the individual has. Are they in school? Do they work? Do they have other providers that are supporting them? How are these supports helpful? And do they need a different network or different supports as they move to whatever the next level is that they're thinking of? And also in the life plan, what we're looking for is information that will support the specific requests for services. And these are just some examples. Obviously, there's more services than we're going to be listing on this webinar, but we selected a few that are more commonly used and more popular, if you will, than some of the others. DayHab, for example. So the whole purpose of DayHab is to address individuals' skills and to help them with opportunities to develop daily living skills, to participate in group settings. These are individuals who aren't necessarily able to work or not interested in employment, but they still want to improve their independence and participate in activities. So what is it about this individual that you're submitting a service authorization request for that can reflect in the life plan segments some of the information that would support why this individual would benefit, what they want to achieve out of participating in a day habilitation program. One of the things that's taken into consideration for that is, of course, the individual's ISPM score, which can give an indication as to the nature of the services that are needed and the type of day hab that's needed. For Community Hab is all about assisting someone to develop their daily living skills, their social skills, relationship building. It's intended for people who are looking to increase independence and obviously to build their skills and have greater access in the community. So here we're looking for what is the current skill level, what can you tell us about that on those things I just mentioned. And also we get a lot of requests for community habilitation. It's a very well-used service, and sometimes we get requests for community hab for very young children. And we really need additional justification for those young children. What's different in this child's need that wouldn't be issues that would naturally be supported by parental involvement and parental support. So there's a bit more justification that we're looking for very young children who are looking for community hab. Employment, can the person travel? Are they able to get themselves to work, or do they need assistance in a different way for that? How do they attend to tasks? Do they have pre-voc skills? And are there behavioral issues that may affect employment? So again, community hab, supporting independence. I mentioned this on the previous slide. Community engagement. It should be goal-oriented and offers skill training and support. And we're looking for information about what skills would be addressed. Day hab, acquiring or retaining skills, improving self-help and socialization. For site-based day hab, you're looking for individuals, information on individual behavioral and clinical needs that can only be met in this more restrictive setting, and those would suggest individuals more likely would have a higher ISPM score. And prior to discussing site-based day hab and day hab in general, we're looking to be sure people have talked about other services, pre-vocational work, community hab, or self-direction. And then there should be information about why the quantity is needed and justification for that. I think I mentioned earlier that we do a quality review as a part of the steps at the front door. Again, the first request, the RSA form itself, is reviewed by the front door staff, or if it's a service amendment request, by the service amendment staff. And then the quality review teams in both cases will do a second level of review to assess the request and whatever justification is provided. I'm going to talk a bit now about the service amendment form and process. And the service amendment, as I believe everyone knows, is used when someone is requesting a change in services. So they're already receiving services, and they're either changing the amount of their services or they're adding a new service, and the service amendment form is used. This service amendment process is an expedited process. It doesn't duplicate the front door. It is a form that's submitted to the service amendment group at the regional office, who are sometimes the same people as the front door, but sometimes they're different individuals. And the form can be, if it's filled out correctly and signed and all the details are on it that is needed, it can be reviewed in really a few business days, and if the request is substantiated, can be authorized fairly quickly. If you don't know where the form is, we've provided the breadcrumbs, the pathway, the yellow brick road to where on our website you can get the service amendment request form. And the details are right there. It's on the resources tab on our website, a forms section, front door forms, and the service amendment request form. And again, this can be submitted, as I mentioned earlier, through the CCO Alerts mailbox. But again, supporting documents have to be uploaded into Choices. And we've had some questions along the way if in the service authorization request form for service amendments, if the provider has to be identified. And in most cases, it isn't required. If the information is known, then it should be listed. But if the service provider hasn't been identified yet, then you can't list it. When the RO staff receives the service amendment request form, or if they receive the RSA, they can contact and probably have contacted many of you if there are questions or if there's additional information that's needed. On both the RSA and the service amendment request form, here's some of the things that we found that kind of are common missing elements that delay the approval of either the request for the RSA or the service amendment request. A lot of times we just don't have a signature on the forms, or there's no service quantities. Again, there's no brief description in the justification section that I mentioned earlier. There's no dates. And this isn't so much the form itself, but the service that's requested on the form isn't reflected in the supporting documents or the life plan. Sometimes we get requests for very large quantities, so that would almost automatically trigger a conversation with the CCO staff to better understand the need for those large quantities, whatever they might be. And then I wanted to just briefly walk through some of the special populations. We've presented this information before, and much of it is reflected in a memorandum that was issued in January that's available on our website and probably is available in your through your CCO. Service authorizations post July 1st, 2018 is the subject matter, and it was issued January 7th of this year, and it was authored by Kate Bishop. And this is information about the different processes, some variations that occur in our special population groups. And that includes people who are in what's sometimes known as non-qualifying settings or ineligible settings for waiver services, but they're getting ready to leave those settings. So that includes individuals leaving residential schools for adult services, individuals living in ICFs that are converting to IRAs, individuals that are leaving or being discharged from hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, or jail or prisons. And these individuals sometimes have a pretty urgent need to relocate and get supportive services. Sometimes there's a good planning time period, for example, individuals in residential schools and the converting ICFs, but people leaving hospitals or skilled nursing facilities sometimes, and in jail sometimes are moving pretty quickly, and we need to have a process that can be responsive to that. So we want to encourage the CCO staff to begin work with an individual very quickly, as much in advance of the discharge as is possible, although again, sometimes we don't know about discharges until they're pretty imminent. Most of the individuals in the settings I've described will already have OPWDD eligibility, but if they don't, then the CCO would be stepping in to assist with that eligibility. And prior to leaving any of these locations, work can begin on a waiver application, on the Medicaid application, if the Medicaid isn't already in place. In some of these settings it would be, and as needed, the LCED. There also might already be a service plan in place or a discharge plan developed, for example, by the hospital or the nursing home or the correctional facility. I mentioned we need to move quickly in some of these situations, but the actual waiver enrollment and the CCO enrollment can't happen until after the individual has been discharged and is physically out of these original settings. We can approve waiver services prior to CCO enrollment, and of course, as you know, the CCO enrollment wouldn't occur until after all the work has been done and at the beginning of the following month. And again, we've reviewed this previously, so I'm just going to kind of quickly summarize residential schools. Again, you have some pretty good advance notice for residential schools, and it should be possible to begin working if you're the selected CCO that the family and individual has chosen several months or at least a couple of months, if not more, before the actual discharge, and work with the individual, the family, the school, and the front door. There are residential school transition coordinators in each district, in each region, that assist and work with the CCOs. And ICF conversions, again, those are planned, and there's usually some pretty good timelines for notification, and the CCO is chosen by the individual and the family in advance of the actual conversion, usually more than a couple of months in advance, and would be working with the other people, the ICF workers, sometimes MHLS, participating in person-centered planning meetings, and working on service development. And again, the waiver application is completed either by the CCO or the ICF provider in some cases, and is processed on the date of the conversion. Then the same steps as you would normally take. The RSA is submitted to the front door with any documents that are needed, and the waiver application is completed. NODs, service authorization letters are processed. There's some special consideration for conversions with Willowbrook class members. The main difference here is that there is a services summary form that has to be filled out that documents the services the individual is currently receiving at the ICF and confirms they'll continue when the ICF or the ICF-IRA conversion occurs. So that's an extra step, and if that's not something you're familiar with and you have a case working with a Willowbrook individual, the front door coordinators can assist you with that information in those forms. And again, the process continues with NODs, service authorization letters. Waiver services can start on the date of conversion, and the service provider is able to bill for services even though the individual is not enrolled yet in care management. Hospitals, nursing homes, correctional facilities. Sometimes you do have pretty good advance notice with someone leaving a nursing home, for example. Otherwise, it could be a little bit faster, and things have to be sped up a little bit. The CCO staff will be assisting as needed with eligibility for OPWDD services, Medicaid, which is sometimes already in place, level of care eligibility determination, and working with the front door and other service providers to develop the service plan, the waiver application, the RSA, and then the front door issues the NODs and the service authorization letters. So that was a little quick review of the special populations, and again, this was a webinar we did, I believe, last fall, and is still on our website if you want to look at that more closely, and the memo that I referenced from earlier in this year. So we're going to take a short pause now and look at the questions that people submitted, and we'll put you on hold, and we'll be back in just a few minutes. All right, we're going to try and answer a couple of questions now.
I've got it on the screen.
A couple of questions now, and then we'll take another pause and see if there's additional questions. There's a question about whether the life plan is required for waiver enrollment now. The life plan is not 100% required for waiver enrollment, and in particular for some of those cases related to special populations that I was covering, where you can't enroll in the waiver until after somebody is out of that setting. But the actual work on the CCO side is coming a little bit later, and the enrollment in the CCO won't happen until, again, the end of the fall or the beginning of the following month. What we're saying is that we need to have the information to justify the service request, not so much for waiver enrollment, but obviously you need to have an understanding and a need for waiver services to enroll in the waiver. So it's all tied together. So we need information from the life plan, as we described earlier in the presentation, to help us understand the needs of the individual and why these services are going to assist that individual, and to some extent how. So no, it's not required for waiver enrollment yet, but that might change in the future, because we really need to follow the design of our process in establishing and partnering with the CCOs. And there's a question about service quantities. What if we do not know the current service quantities? I guess I'm not sure whether that means the service quantities the person is currently receiving, not the ones that are being newly added or increased. And you should be able to access that information in choices if you can access the EAA tools. But other than that, I would assume there's information somewhere, but Deborah, I don't know if you know, because I'm not sure other than that, other than the choices.
I think I can. Yeah, the program enrollments, if you have access to that individual in choices, that individual is enrolled in your CCO, you can go in the choices and look what programs that person is enrolled in. Now, that's just going to show you that what they have been enrolled in. That doesn't mean that they're receiving those services. Then it's up to you to speak to the individual and find out if they are actually receiving those services or they are just enrolled. So that's how you can find out what current services they're enrolled in.
Okay. And a question about how service providers get notified once the service authorization request form has been approved, and the service providers would be notified by the CCO care managers. So front door or the regional office will notify the care manager, and the care manager will in turn connect with the service providers. Deborah, were there other questions that you have? Those are the only ones that I have right now. Or do we want to put folks on hold for a minute?
Yeah, put them on hold for 1 second.
Okay, we'll be right back. Okay, just a couple more things then that we can provide some information on. There was a question about someone who might want self-direction, what services have to be requested when applying for waiver on the service authorization request. And on that authorization request, the individual has to indicate interest in one or more of the HCBS waiver services. That could be respite or community hab, SEMP, IDGS, community transitions, FI. As long as there's a waiver service needed, then that should be included in the service authorization request for self-direction. And back for a second to the question about how to get quantities of units if you don't have that information, what the person is already receiving, and you're submitting a service authorization or a service amendment request form. If you don't have that information elsewhere, the best plan is probably to contact your regional office, the district regional office in your area, and request that information, and the regional office staff should be able to help you. So those are the questions that we have so far, and I believe that's going to conclude our presentation. Kathy, I don't know if you have any additional things you want to comment on. Otherwise, we can say thank you for participating. And
thank you very much, Sally. That was great. Just a reminder to everybody, the PowerPoint will be posted on the website that you go to for all this information, which is noted on one of the previous slides, one of the first slides, actually. So you can look there, probably sometime early, or maybe early next week. By early next week, great, thanks, Juan. So, and we will be in touch on future webinars that are of interest to you all. So thank you very much, and have a great week.